Got a nice spring afternoon here, and I thought I would take a wander over to our neighbor's spot to this area behind me, which is our planting of willow, elderberry, and black currant that was established in the year 2020. I wanted to take a look at that space and see how it's evolving and unfolding and unfurling and leafing out this spring, and then chat about getting it back up to speed as a run for our chickens again for this season. I'll start by spending some time over there just getting some general observations on how things are working. So let me head on out. So this is the corner of our property, quote unquote, and where our neighbor's yard begins. This is part of the whole lawn to food forest project, which we've been documenting for a few years. I can link to that playlist here. And so we're technically on their land. That was our land, but now it's just so murky in a wonderful way as to what's what. It's basically a communal space and things just keep flowing in between the spots. We're actually going to be doing some transplanting together later today, so really sweet how these plants can help bridge spaces. But basically, this is the area that was established from a lawn into a food forest context. The initial planting was about 2 hours, and I'll link here to the video where we talked about doing that. But let me hop on in and just look at how things are growing. This is waking into its third year. This entire space was established through cuttings. So you can see, for example, every 4 feet or so, a Scotia elderberry cutting was pushed into the ground, and they rooted in that first spring of 2020, grew a bit. It was a dry year, they did okay, and then 2021 was nice and wet, they grew well, and then 2022 dry, and this year it looks like they're waking up to be just incredibly happy. But that's all cuttings established, pushed right into lawn. Elderberries, these are black currants here. There's some pink currants that are going a little bit slower, but they're still here. And then there's some plants that just showed up since it was no longer being mowed. An alder showed up, and that's very compatible. They'll fix some nitrogen and there'll be a nice structure in here. And we've added a bunch more trees as well. But overall, boy, oh boy, in 3 years, it's amazing how much this has filled in. In fact, this is a walkway. I used to mow this, but now I don't think we'll need to because the chickens will graze in here and the canopy closure will be strong enough to keep the grass suppressed. But about a week ago, I came through with loppers and just basically chopped my way through the elder and the willow so I could even walk through here. So in 3 years, this planting density has made it from a mowed walkway to a space that I have to basically prune my way through. That's going to be extremely useful. I'll explain in more detail in a bit what the design direction is around having woody debris like this. And the idea is to basically use it as a mesh to allow me to scratch up some bare soil that's all throughout here, sow it to a crop that will feed our hens, and then chop and drop this woody debris over that to protect it. We'll talk more about that in a bit. It's amazing to see some of these willows. This is an average size one. It's a couple of inches in diameter already. Really established tree and really ready to be chopped quite a bit. A lot of material can be harvested to either feed animals or, in this case, make some mulch or protection in here. They're just pretty amazing resource. I think I would have done well to have cut them back hard last year and have coppices that are a little bit more low and dense, but we can always come through and do that later on. Down here, I'm walking towards the north end of this space. It gets a little bit more sparse, and that makes sense. There's a lot more shade being cast from trees off to the west in this area, but still doing okay. And some of the plants, the additional plants we put in, there's persimmons and pecans, there's oaks and pears that have all been added in on the northernmost end. So these will be a canopy, a very, very tall canopy food forest element in the future, not unlike the size of that giant pin oak in there. So it'll be a deep, deep shaded forested space in here someday. Maybe when we're here, maybe not. And this is where the space bridges between our chicken yard and into here. And if I can get things organized in a good way, I will plan to flip the switch, so to speak, and open up this panel and move it here so that the chickens can't go that way, but they can flow out and into this space. It's gonna be really nice for them to have access again this year. Before I can open that up, I've got to check along this fence line. We had some issues last year where the chickens had scratched quite a bit at the bottom and made it a divot enough that they could sneak through. This probably isn't one of them, but I would do well to spend some time and pack soil on the outside of this before we let them through. There's also enough vegetation now that I think will be helpful. But like right there, that's an easy spot for them to scratch away and sneak out. And we'd like to keep them in here if we can. Yeah, the first work will definitely be coming by with sticks and stones and debris to pile up on the outside. I think there's an opportunity, if I'm being thoughtful, where it's like this, where the fence is loose and it needs to be repaired, to pile up some soil, maybe put some compost on it and actually sow it to something like a climbing crop, cucumbers or the like, to climb up on this and be feed for the chickens later. If we're depositing the soil, why not? Pretty sweet to see here on the south end. Last year, as we cleared out spots in the high tunnel and in the garden, and we had bolted lettuce and kale and mustards and the like that we were cleaning out, we threw those tops into here so that the chickens could scratch through them and get some seed. And now there are carpets of different beings come up. This looks like burdock, which we'll certainly let grow in here for a while. Either the chickens can eat it or we can later. And there's tons and tons of Italian oak leaf lettuce all throughout, which is a really sweet ground cover. If we put enough debris on top, then the chickens won't be able to obliterate it. Just a sweet idea of greens as a ground cover, perennial plants like the dandelion doing its thing, and then a peach that'll slowly come into canopy and drop fruit through all that. This little gap under here, that was definitely easy for hens to get through. I just added another section of trash drainage tile that we had laying in the landscape and put some logs on top and hay on the outside. And I think that should allow for water to still leave the overflow of the pond and enter into this willow corridor in this run. But with enough hay there and some logs and some stones on the outside, I think I might be able to keep them from leaving without having to do any shovel work, which would be easier. And now I'm ready to head out back into that space with the ingredients needed to seed it out to some really nice greens and food for the hens for the summer. So went through our seed drawer of greens and took some of the older seed, the bulk miscellany seed, folded that into here, and then added a ton of amaranth since we have lots and lots of that. And if I go out there and I scratch where there's some soil, some little bit of weediness, make a good seed bed, seed this in, and then use pruners to cut down some willow and elder to protect it from the hens, I think we can actually set in motion a greens producing system in that space compatible with 80 some odd chickens running around. There's so much food for them in here already. Just being in the habit of letting plants bolt and set seed and then collecting seed for ourselves, but being super loose about it and throwing tons and tons of seed heads into here. It's already kind of carpet bombed in an exquisite way with food for them in the future. What I can do is come in with this and just scrape a little, here's some strawberries, might as well leave those, but the grass, knock some of that out and throw in some seed just to add some different elements there. And then I'll come back through with a bunch of branches. This elderberry here did well to have a few small lower branches, some dead branches removed. And I can simply drop that over the area that was just sown and keep applying that process. Prune some willow, prune some elder, throw it over wherever it's just been seeded, and throw it over wherever we're seeing mustards coming up spontaneously from seed deposited last year, or some sort of brassica, kale. Those look like radishes to me. There's a carpet of really nice lettuces coming up. These were preserved in part because of the debris that was in here. Random bones and sticks and weeds and piles make it so that the whole space starts filling with greens. So we'll just lay out this platform. It'll look horrendous to some aesthetics. It looks like a debris field, but it'll allow them to walk over it but not eradicate the young plants. And then as the greens come through, they can eat as much as they can find. Here's a young gumi we put in last year, and cleavers. Truly a wonderful character, very helpful in a lot of ways. Grass, amazing if you're trying to graze bigger animals. It's useful somewhat for chickens, but not nearly as much as other greens. And so I'll leave the strawberries because we'll eat those and the chickens will too. I'll leave the dandelions because that's a great nectar flow for the bees and a soil builder. And we'll just fill in everything else in between in there. It's amazing how far seed goes. This is all just saved seed of various types, scattered, roughed up a little bit here or there in the soil where needed, but otherwise just scattered throughout. Anywhere there's bare soil, scattered it pretty thickly. And it's a nice way to hedge bets in that there's the amaranth that if in the next week or so it starts getting really warm and really dry, that could be the dominant plant and do quite well and even put on a grain crop. If it stays really cool and moist, the brassica clan, the different types of kales and mustards, they'll have a better time. And then there's some random seeds like agretti and some other different greens that's older seed. We'll just have to see. Probably just feeding the soil at this point. But yeah, the whole space is sown. I'll go through and cut out all the rest of the dead branches and lower branches on the elder and the willow to cover those seeded areas. And tomorrow we will open this gate. That'll be its own video. I wanted to get all this work done before the hens came in, and also to let them out early in the morning so they can have a full day out here and remember how to get back. So we'll leave this closed for tonight so I can finish the prep, and coming up soon will be them pouring into a new pasture for the spring and summer of pin oaks and white oaks and sycamore and elder and willow and northern pecan and black currants and so many other plants sown to annual greens underneath that are protected by the branches, all in a very marginal wet lawn, almost entirely planted by cuttings just 3 years ago, and now a whole thriving ecosystem to support chickens and our needs too. Thanks for watching.